Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you for such a beautiful space that you created, both of you. And thank you to all of you. Thank you, you here in Santa Cruz, in Overflow Room, and also to those of you who are watching on live stream. An idea is stronger when it is shared, and it's such an honor to be sharing certain ideas with you, not only today, but throughout this campaign, that I feel do constitute the things that need to be said. So thank you so much for giving me the honor of your listening. You know, someone once said to Mahatma Gandhi, how could you be involved in politics? You're such a spiritual man, how can you be involved in politics? And his response was, is not politics a part of Dharma too? And he said something which Deborah reminded me of earlier. He said, politics should be sacred. And he did not mean by that it should be religious. He wasn't talking about dogma. He wasn't talking about doctrine. Obviously, when we talk about something like the separation of church and state in this country, this is one of the most enlightened aspects of our Constitution because it protects our government from interference by religious doctrine or clergy. You're never going to have a minister, priest, rabbi, imam, ayatollah, etc. walk into the halls of Congress and say, you can't pass this law or you have to pass that one. And the other half of that protection, which is the separation of church and state, is that you're never going to have a church like this. You're never going to have a synagogue. You're never going to have a mosque. You're never going to have an AA meeting. You're never going to have a Course in Miracles group. You're never going to have a yoga class. You're never going to have a group of young atheists meeting and have a policeman come in and say, okay, break it up. You're not on the list. Those are very, very important protection in this country. But when our founders established the separation of church and state, they were not trying to suppress the spiritual conversation. If anything, they were trying to protect and liberate it. So when Gandhi talked about space being sacred, and when he talked about politics being sacred, he wasn't talking about religious doctrine. He was talking about the space in the heart, the space we go into in our most quiet hours, the space we go into when we are our most noble, the space we go into when we are our most clear and most conscious. And I've seen in my 35-year career that often that which takes us to that place, and I've found this not only working with other people, but I found this just living my own life. Sometimes the path that took me to my most noble and that which took me to my most intelligent was what could objectively be seen as bad news at the time. Crisis has a way of cracking us open, as they say. Crisis has a way of opening our eyes. And what I have seen over 35 years is that, mainly because in my career and in the career of many of us here, people don't come to us when things are going well. People don't usually call me up and say, you know, Marianne, things are going so great, I just thought maybe we could talk about it. It's more like, I just got a diagnosis, and it is malignant. My child is addicted, and it is heroin. My husband or my wife has said they're out of here. My business is going down. And what I have seen, being up close and personal with so many people in pain, is a very common pattern. And that is within the first 5 minutes, so many ultimately unimportant preoccupations just fall away. All those things we thought were so important 5 minutes ago, 5 minutes later, so clearly don't matter. And then, because those layers of obfuscation and ultimate meaninglessness have fallen away, that's when our most noble and our most intelligent is what comes forth. The doctor told you it's bad news. First you have an emotional reaction, and then your ears are all open. Okay, doctor, what do you suggest we do? And that's how it goes. Because once you move through that initial phase, you're most focused on what the solution can be. But if you go to a doctor to heal you, the doctor can't not give you the bad news. If you had tests done, you expect the doctor to tell you what were the test results. And if the test results were not good, you particularly need the doctor to tell you the truth, because then you need to take that in order to then join with the doctor or whatever healer in terms of your healing options. That, to me, is what political leadership should be. Political leadership should be somebody who tells you what's really going on so that we can discuss this. And especially in a democracy, Nothing a political leader could tell you is going on is anything you don't know. But something I've noticed is how often our politicians do not talk to us about what's really going on. And sometimes they don't talk to us about what's really going on because the really going on stuff that's so bad is the system that they're part of. And so we have to talk, ladies and gentlemen, about what's really going on. Because if we do talk about what's really going on, if we talk about what's really happening, then we're Americans. We can get to the inspiration. We can get to the motivation. We can get to the solutions. We can get to the other side. And as a country, we can do what happens as individuals. We can even be better on the other side of this. But we can't become better on the other side of our current crises and our current turbulence by remaining in denial about what's really happening in this country. You have to be honest. Communication, total communication has to be given. Total communication has to be received. We need to do some real looking in the mirror as individuals, and we have to do some real looking in the mirror as a nation if we want to transform our lives. We have to own some things. As individuals or as a nation, we have to ask ourselves, where am I and where am I not who I say I am? Where do I and do I not live the principles on which I purport to stand? Where and where do I not have some shadows that I better look at? Because otherwise they will continue to be like a river of toxicity within all my experience. Where and where do I not have those character defects that I have to look at and own and admit and cop to and atone for and make amends? Where do I have to stop playing victim? Where do I have to stop blaming other people? Where do I have to be clear? Where do I have to be grown up? Where do I have to stop pretending like I'm a child? Where do I have to stand up? Where do I have to rise up? Where do I have to commit to change? Where do I have to envision what I want? Where do I have to be the man or the woman that God made me to be? And when you do that, miracles do happen. And when this country does that, miracles will happen too. As you know, I have submitted my name, and I am running for President of the United States. And that is because I would like to replace Donald Trump as president in 2020. But I see Donald Trump as an opportunistic infection. Donald Trump could not have gotten hold of this country had we not had a weakened societal immune system. You know, the body can take an amazing amount of assault and injury and heal, integrate it, and heal from it, as long as the immune system is healthy. And our democracy can take an amazing amount of assault and injury too, as long as the immune system is healthy. And every citizen is an immune cell in our body politic. First thing we have to do, I believe, as Americans, is own the fact we allowed this to happen. What is most wrong has been going on for 40 years. For 40 years. And even the stuff that we're so upset about has been happening in somebody's neighborhood. Maybe it wasn't happening in yours, but it was happening in somebody's neighborhood. That's okay. You just see it. You own it. But you stop displacing all the rage onto the symptom. Because let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. We have a bigger issue in front of us than just replacing Donald Trump in 2020. If that's all we do, then the same forces that his agenda represents will be back strong in the midterms in 22. They'll be back strong running for the White House in 24. We have to do so much more than just not go over the cliff. We have to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. And that means more than just changing policies. Because if all you do is change policies, then the next president can come around and just repeal the ones that we liked, but he or she doesn't. We have to go deeper. We have to do more than change. We have to transform. You change by changing things on the outside. But things happening on the outside are mere symptoms. They're merely effects. And if we don't address the levels of cause, then new symptoms will appear again. Right now, our politics is much like the old allopathic paradigm of medicine, that you didn't really take care of your body, you didn't really take care of your exercise, you didn't really take care of your nutrition, and probably, or very likely, you got sick. And then you applied external remedies seeking to eradicate or suppress the symptoms. Nobody thinks that way anymore. Mainstream American consciousness has evolved beyond that. We have an integrative worldview now, an integrative worldview about medicine and healing and the body, and it is time for us to have an integrative politics. The political paradigm, which now dominates in our country, is stuck somewhere in 1985. And a political paradigm stuck in 1985 is an inadequate container for healing the problems that confront us in 2019. And so we have to look deep at cause. And that's what I'd like you to do with me. We know that we have an immoral agenda that is the agenda of this president. Everybody says that. That's kind of known to many conscious people, most conscious people, including many good people who voted for Donald Trump but are disturbed. The issue, however, is that we have to do more than say, oh, his policies are immoral. We have to talk about what would be moral. Because you see, ladies and gentlemen, the only way we're going to defeat outrageous lies is with some outrageous truth. The only way we're going to defeat outrageous lies is with some outrageous love. You know, when you go to a court of law, you raise your hand, you take an oath. You don't just take an oath to tell the truth. There are a lot of candidates telling the truth. I think they're all telling the truth. We have to do more than tell the truth. We have to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That is what will save this nation. And so when we do that, we're going to be like the person who has heard some news from the doctor that's not necessarily pleasant. Not that I'm going to say anything that we don't already know. The issue is not that Americans don't know what's going on. It's that we're not copping to what we know is going on. It's that we're not owning what we know is going on. And that's what political leadership should be. And instead, political leadership too often is that which distracts us from what is really going on. And we all know this. It's like an alcoholic family system where the kids can feel it. I think mommy and daddy are both lying. Something's not being said here. There's this constant sense that shouldn't we be talking about this? Shouldn't we be talking about that? There are a lot of things you better believe we should be talking about, ladies and gentlemen, and every American should be very concerned that we're not talking about these things, even in this campaign so far. First of all, on this list of things that you all already know, but that we all need to look at, because once you get it on the table and have that conscious conversation, that's all we have to do. It's like in an intimate relationship, and you can just feel all the agita, and people aren't really laying it down and saying it. Finally, somebody says, can we talk? And you have that conversation, and afterwards, everything's different. Everything's different. Somebody says, oh, thank God we talked. Then we can go forward. And that's what we have to do as adults. It drives me nuts the way politicians often talk to us, kind of like we're stupid. We're not stupid. My father told me when I was a little girl, he said, he was a lawyer, and he said, talk to the smartest person on the jury. And my 35-year career, if it has shown me anything, it's that people are smart. And no socioeconomic group has a monopoly on nobility, no socioeconomic group has a monopoly on values, and no socioeconomic group has a monopoly on intelligence. And when we speak, and what I have learned is that when you're real with people, they'll be real with you. And when you speak to the intelligence in people, they'll be intelligent with you. If you go deep and real with people, they'll be deep and real with you. Current politics is such a shallow conversation. It is an inadequate container for the level of deep conversation and deep inquiry and deep energies which must emerge at this time. So you know what I'm doing? I'm doing what Americans do. I'm doing what Americans do when political systems fail to go where we need to go. We, the people, will go there ourselves. It's worth noting that the U.S. government did not wake up one day and say, we will now end slavery. The abolitionist movement arose from early evangelicals and Quakers, religious and spiritual communities, always at the heart of the great social justice movements, thank you. It was the abolitionist movement which represented people rising up and people stepping in. And the U.S. government did not wake up one day and say, let's give women the right to vote, shall we? No, that's not what happened. The women's suffragette movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And the U.S. government did not say, we must end segregation. We must stop institutionalized white supremacy in the American South. No, they were wringing their hands. But Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement represented the people rising up and the people stepping in. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going through in this country today is not really new. It's just the newest iteration of the same kind of undemocratic institutional forces that have pushed against democracy before. So we're not the first generation to have to deal with this very, very serious crisis in our democracy. We're not the first generation to have to deal with serious and seriously funded and seriously forceful and even to the point of violence, if need be, attack and assault on our democratic foundations. No, we're not the first generation to have to face this. Let's just not be the first one to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on. And what we're going to have to do is what other generations have done before us. The people are going to have to rise up now, and the people need to step in. And that begins with a new conversation. I think it was Werner Erhard who said, you can live your life out of a vision or you can live your life out of circumstances. So we need a politics that is not just reacting to circumstances. We need to have a vision for what could be, but you can't get to the vision of what could be until you have an honest conversation about what is. And what is, for those of you who might be too young to be as clear about this as some others of us are, this started 40 years ago. Now, I'm not romanticizing what was true in America before 40 years ago, but kids, hear me out. Before 1980, believe it or not, the American corporation was actually expected to care. Shocking. Yep. If somebody had worked for the corporation for decades, the corporation was expected to care if they had a dignified retirement. Can you imagine? Starting in the 80s with the advent of trickle-down economics, a theory, nothing other than an economic theory. It is not an immoral economic theory, but it is an amoral economic theory. And that's dangerous enough to produce immoral consequences. It was the theory that all that a corporation should have to do is to address the stockholder needs for short-term profit. That's all that they should have to do. And that they shouldn't have to worry about it if that was at the expense of the worker, or that was at the expense of the community, or that was at the expense of the environment. All that they felt justified and were told that they were justified in doing was to make sure that short-term profit would be increased for stockholders. And all other stakeholders, well, too bad about that. Now, before I move forward, though, I want to say something that I find very interesting and I think really increases our understanding of our history. The main articulator of trickle-down economics was a man named Milton Friedman. And I myself went around for a long time. It's all Milton Friedman's fault. It's all Milton Friedman's fault. It's all Milton Friedman's fault. In the Chicago school, these guys did that. But actually, I want you to know something that I think the world needs to be clear about. Milton Friedman himself said, but of course, this is only safe if we have a universal basic income. Isn't that interesting? But the people who promulgated the trickle-down economic theory, they left that part out. They left that part out. And the idea that we were all sold on, or many people were sold on, was the idea that stockholders, this small stockholder class, would make so much money, you see. And they would create so many jobs because they would get so much money. And then all that money would trickle down, and it would lift all boats. I think after 40 years, the jury is in. And this not only did not lift all boats, it has left millions and millions and millions of people without even a life vest. In the 1970s, we didn't have this income inequality. We now have the greatest income inequality since 1929. 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. And 40% of Americans live in chronic economic anxiety. Now, ladies and gentlemen, bad public policy produced this. Good public policy will begin a season of repair. Things such as a $2 trillion tax cut passed in 2017. $2 trillion, 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest individuals and corporations. Even though we know it's not going to be any different this time than it ever was, there's absolutely no evidence this thing will even pay for itself. We should repeal that, and we should put back in the middle class part of it, because that, I think, was a good idea. We should also say about those corporate subsidies. You know, I love this line from Martin Luther King Jr. He said, if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. If they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. So we give these corporate subsidies to the tunes. Just take this one in. Last year alone, how much in subsidies do you think we gave oil and gas? $26 billion. So I think we should stop that. And after that, we should also, win these huge multinational corporate entities, the new aristocracy, whether it's health insurance companies or big pharmaceutical companies or gun manufacturers or chemical companies, food companies, oil and gas, fossil fuel companies, defense contractors, nuclear. When they lobby Congress to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, they do expect something in exchange. For instance, Big Pharma, last year alone in Congress, $284 million. Even oil and gas was only $125 million. So the deal is, they want something from this. So a few years ago, they got what they wanted. What they got was that our own lawmakers, how's this for betrayal of the people, gave away to big pharmaceutical companies the right of the government to negotiate for lower drug prices. This while there are Americans who cannot afford their insulin. And in addition to that, while I do believe that the U.S. military should have every dollar that it says it needs in order to secure our legitimate security needs, that they be secured, even though I believe the military should get what they say they need, we're being foolish and we're being naive, and we're allowing ourselves to be distracted if we're not looking at the fact that over and above what the military says they need is hundreds of millions of dollars that defense contractors just say they want. So we spend millions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars on things that have to do with short-term profit for defense contractors, and that now dominates our national security agenda. Now, you fix those things I just mentioned, and you say to billionaires, and some of whom made their money righteously, righteous commerce, I believe in that, and good for you if you made it righteously. Still, we'd like 3% on the assets you have there, Mr. Billionaire. And also to those who have $50 million or more, also, if you made that righteously, I'm happy for you, good for you. We'd still like 2%, please, tax on those assets. And you know what's going to happen? And by the way, I think it's worth noting that there are people with 50 million who agree with what I just said, and there are people with billions who agree with what I just said and have been saying so. There's a very famous billionaire in Los Angeles once said to me, and this was many years ago, he said, "My taxes are so low, it's obscene." And so, ladies and gentlemen, we do the things that I just mentioned. Guess what that's going to mean? We're going to have some cash on hand. And let me tell you what we're going to do. We are going to repair this country. First thing we're going to do is what any conscious human being should do. And the women of America should be leading this charge. We are going to rescue the babies. Millions of American children live in chronic trauma. Millions of American children. We have 13 American children who are food insecure. We have millions of American children who go to school every single day and ask the teacher if he or she has some food for them to eat. We have millions of American children who go to school every day in classrooms that do not even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. If a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Millions of American children live in what we call our domestic war zones, where the violence in their homes and in their communities is so great that psychologists tell us that they're experiencing a level of PTSD. But notice, in a returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq, PTSD means post-traumatic syndrome. These children, it's present traumatic syndrome because it is triggered and re-triggered every day. Psychologists tell us that their PTSD is no less severe than that of the returning veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. We should be rescuing these children no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. But the problem goes in even deeper than that, and that is that you and I as Americans should look very clearly as to why they are not. You see, ladies and gentlemen, they're not old enough to vote. So they're not poker chips. They're not old enough to vote, so they're not a constituency. And they're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage. So since they have no financial leverage, how can they possibly compete with all the clout of the corporate forces whose money just reigns upon our congresspeople and White House every single day? And so these children are just left. You know, when you have the virulent form of a virulent strain of capitalism that has now corrupted our government and hijacked our moral value system because of all the money that floods Washington all the time, that virulent strain, and notice that I'm saying a virulent strain of capitalism. I'm not someone who believes that this is inherent to capitalism. It is a virulent strain of capitalism which requires cheap labor and has no use for those who cannot serve it. And so who gets shafted first? The elderly and the children. We, the American people, must step in and stop that now. That is why I want a Department of Children and Youth, a U.S. Department of Children and Youth. This is more than just education. Obviously, the teachers need to be paid more. Obviously, the class size should be smaller. Obviously, we should remove the high-stakes testing. But it's so much worse than that. Even when we talk about universal preschool, well, of course we should have universal preschool, but we have American children who are traumatized before preschool. We need community wraparound services. We need anti-trauma. We need violent prevention. We need conflict resolution. We need restorative justice. We need food for these children. We need mindfulness in the schools. It is 2019. What are we talking about? We need a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. You know, when I was young, politicians used to always talk about peace and prosperity. And I asked myself several years ago, I wonder why they never use that phrase anymore. I wonder why they don't talk about peace and prosperity. And my first thought was, oh, Marianne, you're just getting older. It's just a cliche phrase. That's why they don't use it. And then I thought to myself, that's not why they don't use it. They don't use that phrase, peace and prosperity, anymore, because that's not the goal anymore. So prosperity, I'll tell you how you have prosperity in this country. I'll tell you how you have an amazing economy 20 years from now. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. That's how you do it. You want to see amazing entrepreneurial spirit? I'll tell you where you'll see amazing ingenuity and genius and entrepreneurial spirit in any kindergarten in any neighborhood in America. That's where it is. And I'll tell you more than that. We are one of only a very few countries that base our educational funding on property taxes. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. In the richest country in the world, when you withhold education from a child, particularly given that the reason is because that child's parents didn't have a lot of money, that is a passive form of oppression. Every school in this country should be a palace of learning, a palace of culture, and a palace of the arts. And you say, how are we going to pay for that? Like I said, you repeal that 2017 tax cut. You stop all those corporate subsidies. You make it so that we can negotiate for drug prices. You stop all the outrageous military spending. You have that 3% tax on billionaires. You have that 2% on 50 million, and we can help our children. Now, I wish I could say, now we're going to go to a happier subject. But all of them are this intense. And on the other side, we can all get happy. Next thing we have to look at is something which I know everybody here is very aware of. and that is the climate crisis that faces us. And we need, I mean, it seems so quaint now to even talk about re-entering the Paris Accords as though that'll fix it. That's like the little talk about preschool of what needs to be done. So let's just go to the heart of the matter. Let's just cut to the chase and admit what we all in our hearts know. What is necessary now, given what confronts us within 12 years if we do not do this, given the massive possibilities of social collapse, given the massive possibilities of food shortage, given the massive possibility of whole swaths of countries and continents that could become literally uninhabitable within 12 years, where the food literally cannot grow, where the heat is too great, given our need to sequester the carbon, given our need to reforest, given our need to turn from a dirty economy to a clean economy, what we need is nothing less and nothing short of a World War II level mass mobilization to deal with climate change reversal. Now, it'll actually be fun. And let me tell you why I say that. Because Americans are hardwired for great things. We're not hardwired for small incremental policy changes. That's not what we're wired for. We're like a big airplane, which when you see it in the sky is like awesome, but when you see it like on the runway, it's this huge clunky piece of metal. Or an amazing sports car, when you see it on a highway, it's like amazing, but when you see it like in just a regular neighborhood, I don't see what's so great. Americans are not tired and weary because we're doing too much. Americans are tired and weary because we're not doing those really important things that we know we were born to do. And so, the kind of mass level of mass mobilization that we will do, and I do not believe that this needs to be posited as a right versus left issue. We need everyone to realize that this is a human survival versus human self-destruction issue, and we need a president who can talk to both sides in such a way that they both understand. She gets it. I'm rich, but she gets it. Or I'm poor, but she gets it. You know, one of the night in my life that still gets a lot of chuckles from an ex-boyfriend that I know. He reminds me every time I see him. He said, "Do you remember the night you woke up as the middle of the night, and I didn't know what was wrong with you?" And I said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And you were like looking at me, and you looked at me like you had seen a ghost, and you went, "Your taxes are too low." We all have to understand we're in this together, ladies and gentlemen. This is an American conversation that we have to have now. And we can have that in relation to the climate change, just as in relation to everything else. I don't feel like I need to go into too much more detail about climate change because I'm aware where I am. We are in California. I don't think this audience needs to be informed by me what is going to happen in the next 12 years if we don't basically do what California is already trying to do. Next thing I want to talk to you about is something else that I know we all know, but we're all just sort of standing here. I think a lot of people think Americans are apathetic. I don't think Americans are apathetic. I think behind every person who appears to be apathetic is someone who so passionately cares they just don't know where to go with how much they care. And that is the topic of race in the United States. It is not my experience, it is not my belief, it is not my experience that the average American is a racist. I don't believe this. But what I do believe is that the average American is woefully undereducated on the topic of race. And so if you will allow me to, I'd like to just become your American history teacher here for a couple of minutes. Black people in this audience know everything I'm about to say, but too many white people either heard it but don't remember it or just aren't clear about it, so let me just go over the narrative a little bit, if I may. In 1619, the first slave ships were brought to the United States, and slavery was not abolished in this country until 1865. That's just shy of 250 years of slavery. At the end of slavery, it is estimated that there were 4 to 5 million formerly enslaved people. Now think about this. You were a slave. Now you're not. Where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to feed your family? So General Tecumseh Sherman promised to every former slave family of 4, 40 acres and a mule. We've all heard the expression. 40 acres and a mule could have meant I can grow my own food, and I can feed my children, and so forth. And for the 12 years during the time when federal troops were stationed in the South to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted, there were amazing possibilities that came to fruition: black congresspeople, black senators, etc. Once the federal troops left, however, white rage came down with a vengeance, and they passed what were called the Black Code Laws. Black Code Laws were to ensure subpar economic, social, and political opportunities for black people. What then happened, ladies and gentlemen, after 250 years, was another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people. What do you call Ku Klux Klan if not domestic terrorists? What do you call lynchings if not domestic terror? So we're talking about 350 years. 350 years of institutionalized violence against black people on this continent. Now, I'm sure that we would all agree, because we are a good people. We're a moral people. I don't think the problem is that Americans aren't good people. I think we are. I'm not saying we're better than other people, but I think we're as good as anybody else. The problem, as I see it, is that over the last few decades, we think about what is the right thing to do, what is the good thing to do, but we have limited that conversation in too many cases to our personal lives. We need to be asking, is it good what my country is doing? That's what it means to be a vital immune cell in the body politic. So I'm asking you to consider what I think is obvious once we do consider it. If you have been kicking people to the ground, and I think we would all agree that 350 years of institutionalized violence is certainly kicking people to the ground, you have two moral obligations. Number one, stop kicking. But number two, here, let me help you get back up. The economic gap between black and white that was obviously there at the end of the Civil War has never been closed. It has now been established that if black families achieved as much wealth as white families, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. There have been many efforts on the part of black communities to accumulate wealth that have then been institutionally and legally thwarted by state governments and legal governments. In many ways, we're sliding backwards. In 1964, 100 years after the end of the Civil War, this country passed the Civil Rights Act, which ended segregation. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act, which gave equal access to the polls for all Americans. However, since 2013, the John Roberts-led Supreme Court has been chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, which is why we have all these voter suppression efforts throughout this country. And there are other ways as well in which we've been sliding backwards. Mass incarceration means we're sliding backwards. Racial disparity in criminal sentencing means we're sliding backwards. There are so many ways. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I submit to you as a candidate. We don't need another study. We don't need more evidence. We don't need another commission, all of which is code for knock it down the road, knock it down the road, knock it down the road. What we need is to pay reparations for slavery. And I'd like to say very quickly the difference between race-based policies. A lot of candidates are saying, oh, I'm all for reparations under the guise of race-based policies. It's not just the guise. I mean, it's not a guise. But their idea is race-based policies. Race-based policies does give financial restitution. But to me, race-based policies are a continuation of the same paternalism. I mess with you, now let me tell you how I'm going to fix you. Reparations are something different altogether. Reparations carry moral force because reparations include an inherent mea culpa, an inherent acknowledgement of a wrong that has been done, a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of a people to pay that debt. Germany has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II. That doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but paying reparations has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. Also, here in California, when Franklin Roosevelt, the Japanese internment camps, in 1988, Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, whereby All the surviving prisoners from the Japanese internment camps were paid between $20,000 and $22,000. The plan that I submit, my plan of reparations, is that the United States government pay between $200 and $500 billion to be dispersed over a period of 20 years. It would be dispersed through the auspices of a reparations council, people who are themselves descendants from American slaves, themselves leaders in academia, in politics, in culture, and so forth. And the stipulation, the requirement on the part of the U.S. government, is that this money is to be dispersed for purposes of economic and educational renewal. And I'd like to remind you, before we leave the topic, ladies and gentlemen, that this will not be a debit. This will be an asset. This will be an economic stimulus. And in addition to being an economic stimulus, you and I will be a generation known for having shown up and done the next thing that really needed to be done to solve this. Everything that I'm talking to you about here today, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, has to do with the issues of moral repair. The reason we need to deal with reparations, in my mind, is because it is a basic spiritual principle that you cannot have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. That's why Catholics go to confession. That's why the holiest day of the Jewish New Year is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It's why in Alcoholics Anonymous you have to take a fearless moral inventory and admit your character defects. Racism is a character defect that has been with us from the beginning. That's okay. You're honest. You look at it. You deal with it. You atone, and you make amends. Atonement itself is not enough, however. If you owe me $1,000, I appreciate the apology, but I'd also like the money back. And so at this point, we need to do that. And we not only need to pay reparations for slavery, but we need to address all the ways in which we need to repair relationships, particularly economic relationships, that are a consequence of the genocide and cultural annihilation of Native Americans. One more issue, and then we can get to the happy part. The other issue is no happier than the ones I've already mentioned, however, and that is the issue of our national security. I already mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, about the money that we spend over and above what the military says that they need. And to just give you a picture of what this means, is that we pay every year, our military budget, $760 billion. Now, in war and peace, you can liken to sickness and health. You can't just take medicine, you have to cultivate health. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. Right now, our national security agenda is just dominated by endless preparation for war. What, we're going to just back up into peace? No, war is the absence of peace, just like peace is the absence of war. We must be a generation that declares peace. We should have peace games. We should have peace games just like we need war games. And that's why I want a United States Department of Peace. Right now, right now, we have a $760 billion military budget and a $40 billion State Department budget. State Department is diplomacy and development and mediation. And within that, we have a $17 billion USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then also as part of that $40 billion, we have less than $1 billion that goes to the peace-building agencies. Every American needs to know what peace building is because it has such relevance domestically and internationally. These are the four statistics, ladies and gentlemen, the four factors which statistically prove that when these things are present, peace is increased and conflict is decreased. And it's not going to surprise anybody here. Number one, expansion of economic opportunities for women. Number two, expansion of educational opportunities for children. Number three, reduction of violence against women. And number four, amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people, whether in a corner of this country or in another corner of the world. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Because desperate people do desperate things, and desperate people are more vulnerable to capture by genuinely psychotic forces. We must wage peace, not just endlessly prepare for war, but we have to look at how corrupt and how rotten this whole thing is. Why don't we do it already? Because there are no corporate profits to be made from waging peace. And there are so many corporate profits to be made from endless preparation for war. And what does it say to you? That Tulsi Gabbard and I are the only people who even mention it on this campaign. General Eisenhower, later President Eisenhower, left the presidency and in his farewell address talked about the military-industrial complex. And that's all that we're talking about here. I don't think any person should live only for themselves, and I don't believe that any generation should live only for itself. So everything that I've talked to you about today, everything that I've talked to you about, the things that to me are the pillars of moral repair and moral policy alignment, they seem outrageous. They seem radical. That's how divergent we are from the goodness in our hearts. Everything I said to you should be common sense. Everything I said is only radical in the sense that democracy is radical, and only radical in the sense that love is radical. And of course, the system in which such policies are entrenched would call me wacky, crazy crystal lady to make sure you don't take me seriously. Obviously, I challenge the idea that only those whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the system, which is a mindset that has led us into this ditch, are the only people qualified to lead us out of this ditch. I rather agree with Franklin Roosevelt, who said that the primary role of the presidency is moral leadership. He said that administrative aspects of the job are secondary. Today, we have a lot of good political mechanics in this country, and I respect political mechanics, and there are many good, I don't know about many, there are a few really good political mechanics running for president. But I'll tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, today we need political vision more than we need political mechanics. You can have... You can have the greatest car mechanic in the world, but the greatest car mechanic doesn't necessarily know what road should I be taking to Cincinnati. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a serious problem on our hands, and I do not believe that a traditional political pathway is the way out of the problems that we have. Traditional politics right now is allopathic medicine, but we need to go deeper. We must be holistic, and we must be integrative. And before I close, I want to talk for a moment about why that is. We have a really big problem on our hands. Not only the things that I've talked to you about today, which we all knew, but also something else which we all know, and that is our president and the campaign that he will be waging next year. This man's election last year was engineered by Cambridge Analytica. And Cambridge Analytica is a military-grade propaganda weapon. It was developed for warfare, and it rests on a level of data mining, much of which is taken from shadow data elements, that goes so deep and has such a capacity to dismantle reason, such a capacity to trigger, and such a capacity to manipulate, that regular intellectual argument, analysis, and emotional persuasion that form the core of the traditional political arguments becomes almost helpless in front of it. Too many Americans are in denial about what is coming at us next year. And if you agree with me that we will have everything we had last time, but even more next time, because the president has the power of incumbency, and the president has the same personality that we know that he has, and help from whomever else he has, then I submit to you that a traditional political strategy is like sharpening your knives, and huge guns are coming at us. Ladies and gentlemen, the level of manipulated and designed fear mechanisms that those forces represent have the power to dismantle reason. That level of fear overrides reason, and only one thing overrides fear, and that is love. So when I said, I mentioned to you already that the abolitionists came from the early evangelicals and Quakers. I mentioned to you already, well, I didn't mention already, but many of the leaders of the suffragette movement were Quakers. Obviously, Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. The civil rights movement emerged from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. All of the great social justice movements have arisen from a level of religious and spiritual conviction, because religious and spiritual conviction gives you two internal powers: the power to say no and the power to say yes. The power to say no to what simply must not be tolerated, and the power to say yes even when they say you could never do it. How could the abolitionists have ever thought it was reasonable that they could get slavery abolished? How could those women suffragettes have ever thought that it was reasonable to think that they could get women the right to vote? And how, after 100 years, would people in the civil rights movement have ever thought that it was reasonable to consider the fact that they could dismantle segregation? This has nothing to do with reason. This has to do with standing for what is right. And when you stand with conviction for what is right, that conviction becomes a force multiplier. Many more people love in this country than hate. I'm not worried about that. Many more people love than hate in this country and in this world. But the haters, the bigots and the racists and the anti-Semites and the homophobes, the xenophobes, the Islamophobes, all of those forces which have now contained themselves within a political structure, they are effective today because they are convicted. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have 10 haters who are convicted and who have made it clear and continue to make it clear that they will do whatever is necessary to effectuate their worldview. If you have 10 of those, and then you have 100 people who I love, kind of, sort of, sometimes when it's convenient, when it's my kids, then the haters are going to win. We need to love with as much conviction as is now demonstrated by those who hate. And the love that will heal this country, the love that's healed this country is a serious love. It can't just be love for our children. It's got to also be love for the children on the other side of town. It can't just be love for the children on the other side of town. It's got to be love for the children on the other side of the world. We can't just ask, is my life good? We've got to ask ourselves, what does it mean that the United States, for the sake of $350 billion in arms sales, will be willing to give aerial support to a war that Saudi Arabia is waging against Yemen, starving tens of thousands of people, including children. And kudos to Bernie Sanders for having been a leader in the bipartisan effort to stop this, of course, which was then vetoed, and they could not be overridden in the House. Ladies and gentlemen, we gotta love each other more deeply than we've ever loved each other before. We've got to love our country more deeply than we have ever even thought to love about it before. We have got to love democracy deeper than we have ever loved it before. We have got to love this earth more deeply than we have ever loved it before. We've got to love our unborn great-grandchildren more deeply than we have ever loved them before. We have got to stand up. We have got to put aside our childish preoccupations. And if there's anybody here who's saying the whole thing is just too traumatizing, let me just say this. We do not have time for you to finish your trauma work before you show up for your country. You think those people who walked across the bridge in Selma were not traumatized? They didn't know if they were going to send the dogs out. They didn't know if they were going to send the hoses out. They didn't know if they were going to send the bullets. What about those women suffragettes who, when they were thrown in prison for nothing other than marching for the right of women to vote, the conditions in the prison were so awful that they went on a hunger strike, at which point the administration of the prison sent men into their cells to force these metal contraptions on their throats to force them to eat. You think they weren't tense? You think they weren't anxious? Let me tell you something. We need to reclaim the revolutionary fervor and passion that other generations have shown. We have had problems. We have had problems in this country before, and I think that I've been clear about that today. And we have problems in this country now. I've been clear about that as well. But we must identify the problems. But in terms of our historical narrative, let us identify with the problem solvers. Let this not be a generation about which it will one day be said, they really did allow the whole thing to fall apart on their watch. Let that not happen. Let's rise up. Let us be fooled by no one. Let us determine our own course, not the course that any institution, even a political institution, would tell us is the course that we must take. Let us instead revisit our mission statement. Let us revisit the principles of our Declaration of Independence. Not only that all men are created equal, not only that God gave all men the inalienable rights of life and of liberty and the pursuit of happiness, but also, let's also remember the two that go after that. Number one, governments are instituted to secure those rights. And this really final juicy one, when the government's not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's simply the American thing to remember. I am certainly not suggesting that we abolish it, but I am suggesting that we alter it. And there is no gatekeeper class. There is no gatekeeper class mentioned in our Constitution, whether political or media. The power in the United States was given by the founders with startling relevance and modernity to the people of the United States. But if it's not in your heart, it's not in your hands. If those principles just become inscribed on marble walls somewhere, or under parchment, written on parchment under glass somewhere, but no longer alive in our hearts, then they become dead. And when that happens, when principles are basically no longer alive because they're not alive in us, you know what happens to us? We become a generation very easy to play. We've been played. We've been fooled. Let's not do it anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know, I appreciate that. And when we began talking today, I talked about how we had to be honest with ourselves about how things are in order to get to that which could be. And so when Deborah spoke this morning so eloquently, she talked about grounding ourselves so that when we leave here, we could become conduits for making real the things about which we speak. And that's what's most important. We're not here to just elevate the conversation. We're here to elevate the country. We're not here to just change the conversation. Let us be here to change the country. Because what the abolitionists knew was that in some realm as yet unseen, there was a world in which slavery did not exist. In some realm as yet unseen, the suffragettes knew that there was a place in which women had full empowerment. And the civil rights workers knew that in a place as yet unseen, segregation no longer existed. So let us leave here when we leave here today, holding in our hearts and in our minds, not only in our hearts, not only in our minds, but also in the very cells of our being so that we might give it form, a world in which the ground has been healed, the air has been healed, the waters have been healed. No contaminants in the water, no carcinogens in the food, no threats to voting rights, economic justice, our children rescued, no unnecessary suffering, the United States having reclaimed moral leadership throughout the world. Let us not just stand firm to make sure that on our watch certain things will no longer exist, but let us in our own ways, each and every one of us as an immune cell in this country, use our lives in such a way as to open the space for a possibility in which this country is not only repaired, it is better than ever. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.